No, an emergency phone, report it.
Yeah, I need police. There's a man in a lady's house right now. Wait a minute. Rachel, what's your address?
Just tell him to come here.
They got to come here.
Okay, and what happened? You saying that she
Somebody broke in her house, and when she went home, they were in there.
And she came there and told you guys that?
Yes, and collapsed.
Okay, well, I'll get someone out.
Yeah, we need them now.
Thank you.
It was the eve of Valentine's Day, and I came home to find a stranger in my home. When I saw him, I immediately knew what it meant, and I just screamed, "No!" And I ran back towards the sliding glass door. He was on me very quickly. He tackled me to the floor. I fell and I hit my head, my cheek on a coffee table. My phone popped out of my hand, and as I was going to grab for it, still on the ground, that's when he got up and he just took the gun and he put it in front of my face. Like, look what I've got. And it was immediate submission. He said, "If you try to run or you try to scream, I will shoot you. This bullet will travel faster than you can run, and it is louder than you can scream." And then he took me into my bedroom where he raped me. And he made me perform oral sex on him, all while holding the gun to my head. He also made me cover my mouth so that I wouldn't scream, so that my neighbors wouldn't hear when he sodomized me. He needed to get rid of the evidence, so he had me take a shower, all while holding the gun to my head. There were so many instances where I thought I was gonna die. That was one of them. I could just imagine my brains hitting the tile as I took my last shower. I don't know what it was that made me think of the ATM. I just thought, get him out of the house. I had about $800 to my name in my checking account, and he had me withdraw it all. That was the moment I started shaking. That was the moment I started getting really scared. He said to me, "Oh, don't be scared. You're doing just great. You're doing just fine." Like I was one of the best victims he'd come along in a long time. And then in the same breath, he said, "But if I see this on the news, I will kill you. I know where you live." And I patted him on the leg and I said, "Don't worry, I'm not gonna tell anybody. Like, this kind of thing happens between old friends all the time." So I just backed away from the car and I raised my hands and I just said, "You know, you have everything, just take it, just take it." And I was lucky enough that he drove off in the other direction and I ran in the other. I was hysterical.
We work very, very closely with EMS, law enforcement, and first responders to be sure that we have a seamless system to provide services to victims of violent crime, sexual assault, and traumatic circumstances, what we call the Sexual Assault Response Team, or the SART. Everybody that would be part of responding to a sexual assault came together and developed a protocol. So everybody knows their role and everybody knows how to respond best to a victim of a sexual assault. The Victim Service Center is an exceptional and tremendous resource to have in the community because we provide free, confidential crisis intervention, advocacy, education outreach, forensic examinations to victims, all in the immediate aftermath of their victimization. But there's also legal support and case management with victims long after the fact, including therapy and support groups. So it's really an ongoing, sustained effort as long as the victim needs those services. The Sexual Assault Treatment Center is a standalone facility, and it's where we ask victims of sexual assault to go in the immediate aftermath of a rape or a sexual assault. When you walk in, it's like an old house, and it's very calming. We try to begin the healing process as quickly as possible by not having them in an emergency room situation. They can get that one-on-one care. There's nobody else around. It's just a really unique sort of model that we are fortunate to have here in Central Florida. Forensic exams are performed by our sexual assault nurse examiners, or we call them SANEs. A forensic exam can be done within 120 hours of the incident. So within the first 5 days, we can still get some DNA evidence. We have a very specific exam room that has everything that you would expect in a medical environment, and in some cases, the exam table and the colposcope and all the technology that we use even is better than some hospital environments. And in fact, we even can provide medications if that is what the victim desires, and it's a full comprehensive exam to collect the DNA evidence.
Every victim of a sexual assault has a right to an advocate. The Victim Service Center of Central Florida meets this need by providing a team of free Victim Service Center advocates that are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every victim advocate at the Victim Service Center is a master's level certified sexual assault counselor. The victim advocate, along with the nurse, accompanies the victim at either our forensic exam sites or the hospital in some cases. The victim advocate listens to the victim's concerns, addresses the victim's feelings, and also explains common reactions that they should expect in the future. The victim advocate will also provide information about the services that are available at the Victim Service Center, including therapy services, support groups, as well as other resources that are available to the victim. The victim advocate explains the criminal justice process from start to finish so that the victim would know what he or she may expect. And finally, the victim advocate will explain the purpose of the forensic examination, and the advocate will be present during the examination to provide support. These services are available to the victim whether they choose to report to law enforcement or not, and all of our services are confidential. Florida statutes set forth a privilege between the victim and the sexual assault counselor, also known as the victim advocate, which ensures that there is no disclosure of any confidential information regarding counseling records or any communication between the victim advocate and the victim, unless the victim provides consent to do so. This statute is very important because it creates an atmosphere of confidence and trust between the victim and the victim advocate. And this is crucial as it allows for the victim to be able to openly disclose facts about the assault, memories that he or she may be experiencing, as well as fears and emotions regarding the assault.
The VSC operates a 24/7 hotline, we also call it the helpline, where victims can call directly. It's going to be picked up by a master's level counselor.
They immediately speak with one of the victim advocates who provides information about the options that the victim has, the services available, forensic examination, medical interventions, as well as the support programs that are available at the VSC.
The hotline is helpful to first responders in that they can activate the system and have our crisis counselors and our sexual assault nurse examiners immediately respond. But additionally, if there are questions about the protocol itself and what they should do next, it's the perfect place to call and get the answers to the questions that are on their mind.
11 and any other echo that can break. It's 6409 Raleigh Street, point on emergency.
Rachel's call initially came in as a home invasion robbery. And just a few minutes after the call came in, we also obtained information that a sexual assault had also occurred. Once the call for service comes in, the officers respond by setting up vehicle perimeters or foot perimeters if the person left on foot or left in the vehicle. The perimeter will be larger or smaller depending on how they left. Ebola is an acronym for Be on the Lookout. What happens is we obtain information about a suspect or a suspect vehicle. That information is broadcast over the radio channels as well as intercity and other stations. Once the officer arrives on scene, the first thing they want to do is check the victim to see if the victim needs any medical attention. If the medical attention is needed, well, then we would call for the fire department.
When EMS arrives at a crime scene, their role is to explain to the victim that we are there for them. First responders should have a victim-centered approach where they're compassionate, non-judgmental, and sensitive to the feelings of the victim. We live in a very diverse society here in Central Florida. It's a melting pot. There's people from all different places, different cultures, different ethnic backgrounds. Their response to trauma can vary. The main thing is that we don't judge and we treat everyone with respect and with dignity. When EMS arrives at a crime scene, their primary responsibility is to assure that the victim is stabilized medically. Once that's been accomplished, then their role is to explain to the victim that there's another agency, the Victim Service Center, that's there to help them following their sexual assault.
The VSC has what we call crisis cards available for first responders, which include the hotline number, and these cards are both printed in English and in Spanish.
The VSC crisis cards are an excellent tool for paramedics and EMTs to use to pass on to anybody that they feel may benefit from the Victim Service Center, because sometimes people may not be willing at that moment to seek help, but yet there's that feeling that they need it. When I see a victim of sexual assault, my emotions turn to anger and frustration at how we could do this to each other as people. The VSC is crucial for victims of sexual assault, mainly because if it weren't for them, then who? Who's going to be there to help them put their lives back together after such a trauma as a sexual assault?
If it's determined that the victim does not need medical attention right away, well, then we will begin a preliminary investigation. We would try to get a gender-specific officer for the victim so that the victim feels more comfortable, and also interpreters if needed. The interviews are conducted privately, typically one officer with the victim. What we'll obtain is the victim's information, location of where the crime occurred, witness information, location of the suspect if known or which way they went, and also physical evidence. When conducting an interview with the victim, we use the start by believing approach. We reassure the victim that what occurred was not their fault and that their safety is our top priority. Ways that you can establish a rapport and gain the trust of the victim is to speak in a calm, soft voice. You want to reassure them that you're there to help them and take care of them. You have to be able to be compassionate and understand the victim, and you also have to understand that the victim just might be the actual crime scene. It's important that first responders remember that not all victims will be crying, they won't be hurt, but they will be traumatized and you may not be able to see it. They may lose their train of thought, they may lose their timeline, they may not remember everything. And you don't want to ask why questions. Why questions tend to infer to the victim that they may have done something wrong.
Sergeant Parker was the first responding officer to me. He immediately made me feel safe. He told me, there's media here, they want to get pictures of you, but I'm not going to let them. I felt like he was my personal pit bull. I never got the feeling from Sergeant Parker that he didn't believe me. The only feeling I got from him was that he was doing everything he could to help me and help find the person that had hurt me.
Rachel's case is an acute case, which means it's a sexual assault that occurred within the last 120 hours. When we first arrive at the scene, we would meet with the victims and conduct a preliminary interview. It's extremely important to let the victims know they have the right to have a victim advocate present during this entire process. Once we determine that a forensic exam is necessary, we ask them if they're willing to submit to a sexual assault exam. We then contact the VSC hotline and ask the victim advocate and the nurse examiner to respond to the forensic exam site. If the victim does not want to prosecute, we would advise them that they can obtain free medical services from the Victim Service Center and a forensic exam if they consent to do so. At that point, I would give them a card from the Victim Service Center with a hotline number, and they can contact an advocate and discuss their options. The next step is to identify, collect, preserve, and impound the evidence at the crime scene.
We had to take every crime scene individually, starting with Rachel's apartment. That's where the majority of the crime actually occurred, the sexual assault. So therefore, we had to make sure that we collected as much evidence as we could there in order to identify the suspect. The vehicle was also a crime scene, which could also have DNA that we could preserve. The third was the ATM center. That's actually what broke the case. The suspect went inside the ATM service center with Rachel, so we actually got video of him. And the last place it was a crime scene for us was the parking lot where the 911 call came in and where the first responders went to take care of Rachel.
We collected her clothing that she was wearing immediately after the rape. We collected the linen from the bed. We took several photographs of her apartment. We swabbed in the area of the shower where her attacker made her take a shower, and we also dusted the entire apartment for fingerprints. In most cases, we give the victim a ride to the forensic exam site. Once we arrive, we take the victims to the law enforcement room where we conduct an in-depth interview. We talk about suspect description, what exactly happened to them, and where it happened. We then ask them if they are willing to prosecute in this case.
It was calming, and everybody in it was calming and peaceful.
When I first made contact with Rachel at the forensic exam site, I observed that she had welts on the left side of her face, and also she had beginning stages of bruising around the left side of her eye socket. When I interviewed Rachel, it was important to let her know that she was safe. She was in obvious distress. I could tell by the tone in her voice. She was shaking uncontrollably. And it was very difficult for me because I wanted to get as much information from Rachel as I could. However, I had to consider her well-being, her emotional state, so I just gave her time.
Detective Lopez, he did not push me to hurry up my story. He didn't interrupt me. He let me tell my story as it came.
When Rachel provided the entire accounts as to what happened to her, honestly, you're not supposed to take it personal, but I was very, very upset. And I did something that detectives should never do, is promise a victim that we will catch the perpetrator. And that's one thing that I promised Rachel that we would do. I told her we will catch this person that did this to you.
I remember he promised me he would catch him, which I think he got in trouble for. Because you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to promise.
Once we conduct our preliminary investigation, we would turn the victims over to the advocates, who then would handle all their personal and emotional needs and would assist them throughout the process.
The forensic exam is performed by the sexual assault nurse examiner, or the SANE-A, which is a nurse who is certified to do sexual assault exams for adolescents and adults. The VSC provides medical intervention and forensic exams following a sexual assault to those ages 12 and older. When a case falls outside of the 120-hour window, we recommend that the patient is referred to the Victim Service Center or the Department of Health and their primary care provider to help them with STD prophylaxis and possible pregnancy prophylaxis as well. The forensic exam can be performed whether or not the patient chooses to report to law enforcement. When a patient chooses not to report the crime, we can store the evidence kit anonymously so they can choose to report at a later time. When we begin a forensic exam, the very first thing that we want to do is obtain consent from the patient or from the patient's guardian if the patient is a minor. During the forensic exam, the sexual assault nurse examiner sits with the patient and does an interview regarding their medical history and a history on the incident, and then we do a head-to-toe assessment based on the assault. Next, we collect DNA evidence based on the assault, and then we document the findings accurately on a body map, as well as take photos with special equipment specifically designed for sexual assault cases. Medical intervention is also provided for the patient, including STD prophylaxis and pregnancy prophylaxis if requested by the patient. For proper evidence collection, it is very important that first responders collect the patient's clothing and personal belongings, make sure that they are dry, and package them separately in paper bags. Throughout the forensic exam, it is the top priority to make sure the patient feels safe, calm, comfortable, and emotionally supported. I always let them know that what happened to them was not their fault, that they didn't deserve what happened to them, regardless of the circumstances. I want them to know that I'm here for them, that we are here to help them, and to get them through this.
Whether a victim intends to prosecute or not, it is important for first responders to inform the victim of their options regarding all free services available to them at our forensic exam sites. These services include forensic exams, preventative medication for STDs and pregnancies if within 72 hours, counseling and therapy, as well as a shower facility with food, water, and new clothing. And finally, we provide transportation to a safe location.
Everything was taken from me that evening. Everything. Not just my purse and my cell phone and my car and my dignity from a stranger, but everything I was wearing had to be taken into evidence. So I didn't even have clothes. And the VSC gave me back my first change of clothes. From then on, they helped just give me back everything. Give me back my security, give me back my confidence, give me back a feeling of safety, a feeling that I was in control. I had the power.
The caller thinks maybe 66 as well.
In some cases, unfortunately, sexual assault victims do need to be transported to an emergency department. In those circumstances, the paramedics make a special effort to let staff know what's occurred so that patient can be treated as a priority.
The procedure for when a victim of sexual battery arrives to the emergency department is to see that patient as soon as we can. It is important to triage that patient according to hospital protocol. It is our goal to get that patient out of the emergency room triage area as soon as we can to ensure privacy and confidentiality. A victim of sexual assault must be treated as priority for the importance of evidence collection and medical intervention. It is important for ER personnel to advise the patient not to eat, drink, smoke, urinate, or bathe, because it needs to be decided whether or not a forensic exam will occur. Stabilizing the patient takes precedence over the collection of forensic evidence. When I encounter a victim of sexual assault, I immediately feel as if I need to protect that individual. I feel sad for that person that they went through this experience, but I want to help them and protect them and help them feel safe. The role of the emergency room nurse is to only gather information about the medical history regarding the medical complaint. The ultimate decision to have a forensic exam is up to the patient. I provide the sexual assault victim with the Victim Service Center hotline phone number, so that way they can discuss options with the advocate. In cases that the sexual assault victim wants to report the offense, the hospital assists the victim with calling law enforcement. The hospital can only contact law enforcement with patient consent or situations that are mandated by Florida statute.
When a victim reports a sexual assault from a hospital, I would respond to the hospital and conduct a preliminary interview with them. When I determined that a forensic exam is necessary, I would then contact the VSC through the hotline and request for a victim advocate and a nurse examiner to respond to the hospital to conduct a forensic exam.
In a case where the patient's not being released from the hospital, the SANE can go to the hospital and perform the forensic exam. However, that is dependent upon medical clearance as well as consent from the patient.
When a forensic exam might be conducted at the hospital, the emergency room nurse calls the VSC hotline and discusses this with the victim advocate and SANE.
Typically, it is preferred that the patient be discharged from the hospital and referred to the forensic exam site to have all medical intervention and the forensic exam completed there.
After the forensic exam, the nurse would turn over the toxicology kit, the sexual assault evidence kit, the medical forensic report, as well as all the clothing the victim was wearing. When I returned to the police station, I would then submit all of that evidence to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab, where they would conduct an analysis. The SANEs at the Victim Service Center are top-notch. They're very thorough at what they do. The evidence they collect and their testimony in trial leads to many convictions. In Rachel's case, the SANE collected DNA evidence that helped identify the suspect. That, along with law enforcement efforts, helped secure the conviction of the suspect.
Can someone set up a big cordon so we can try to find the car?
The Orlando Police Department did not stop until they found him. His story was that we had been a couple, and that night I'd found out that he was cheating on me or doing something, and he'd brought me a Snickers bar for Valentine's Day. And I felt so awful that I hadn't gotten him anything, that's why I took him to the ATM and withdrew my entire bank account so that he could go buy a gold necklace. Obviously, the jury did not believe him. 18 months later, he was convicted for 10 felony counts with a handgun, leading to 4 life sentences and 67 years in prison.
The investigation was a complete team effort from the first responders, Criminal Investigations Division, the crime scene technician, members of the Victim Service Center, the criminal justice system, and most importantly, Rachel.
In Rachel's case, it really hit home for a lot of us. As police officers, we've all worked a midnight shift and late shift, and we've left our own wives home alone. At that time, my daughter was off to college, so I thought about her as well. Even while I was investigating Rachel's case, my wife was home alone and my daughter was living in an apartment. So it could have been easily one of our loved ones who was attacked that night.
I have a lot of pride. I have a lot of passion for what I do. I have a lot of passion for catching people like this, and to be able to be part of that I was happy.
The reason it's so important that we care for and care about sexual assault victims is that their world has just been turned upside down on its head. They're at a loss. They need us, and we need to be there for them.
It is a great feeling for me to know that I made a difference in that victim's life, even though they experienced such a very traumatic event. I was there, and I made a difference for them.
It breaks my heart when someone has been victimized and had their rights and the power taken away from them. I want to be there for our patients. I want to be there to let them know there's someone on their side. So if I could just be a little part in getting them to becoming a survivor, a little part in getting their attacker prosecuted, and not to be able to do this to anybody else in our community, just that part makes it all worth it.
The work of first responders is critical. We rely on them day in and day out. They are the lifesavers in our community, and they're the first point of contact for a victim. I couldn't thank first responders enough for recognizing the fact that the Victim Service Center of Central Florida is the go-to resource in our community to be able to help victims through the healing process. They are absolutely the critical link to being sure that victims get the help and assistance that they need in the aftermath of a traumatic circumstance, a violent crime, or a sexual assault.
Everybody I encountered, from the EMT to Sergeant Parker, who protected me, to the nurses that examined me, to the police that found him, they were all patient with me. They were all kind, caring. Every one of them had a part in my case and making sure this person couldn't hurt anybody else again. And I will be forever grateful for that.
Well, Rachel is a success story because the SART protocol was followed exactly as it was designed, and all the key players from law enforcement to the Victim Service Center responded immediately and began the healing process. And the result of all of that is that Rachel is the amazing survivor that she is today.